Hey, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Things are good. Things are good. Busy, busy, which is good. Busy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, that was funny. When I showed you the stream stuff, you're like, uh, the discussion and whatever else we feel like talking about.
Yeah, yeah. That seems to be the flow, the structure.
we go on a lot of tangents. I will admit, but I actually think that's kind of good because yeah, I think yeah, there's something about like studying Tanya that I think shouldn't be just you sitting there reading a book.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. I believe this is where we stopped.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry, I didn't see the comment, but yeah, I checked.
Okay.
This is the place.
Okay. So you wanna start reading?
Yeah, I'll go for it. So, okay, I have it also here. So let me just. Okay, so we are talking about the composition of the Tanya. So structurally, the Tanya may be divided into a number of sections, each dealing with a major subject and comprising a number of composite topics. The first section of the work, chapters 1 to 8, is devoted to an analysis of the psychological structure of the Jewish personality. Here, the author discusses the two levels of consciousness, to use modern terminology, on which a person operates. These two levels of consciousness are derived from two sources, which the author terms the divine soul and the animal soul. He examines the essential attributes and practical faculties of each. And in dealing with the animal soul, the author discusses also the nature of evil, both metaphysical and moral. Evil is basically conceived in terms of disunity, good in terms of unity. Okay, I imagine we have a lot to go through, but it's probably more better to go through it when we read it in the book. Um, One thing that was interesting to me, I was reading through what we read at the beginning,
Hmm.
was just that he made a distinction between. First of all, he made the parallel, or yeah, he compared between the Rambam's Guide to the Perplexed and the Tanya, a certain comparison, and then he also said that it is for two distinct readers, let's say, and Rambam is more. And I was trying to summarize what he said is just in terms of Rambam is more about reconciling philosophy and tradition,
Hmm.
and the Tanya is more about for people that are not necessarily they're not familiar with that at that point because the Scala movement, like we said, didn't reach that part of Europe. So
Hmm.
it's really just about revealing the path, and I wrote like brightening its surroundings. So like just making sure people see more of the stuff as they go through it. So yeah, I
Yeah,
thought
the
that,
guide.
yeah.
So the guide for the perplexed is kind of, it's like, oh, you are a really well learned Jewish
Mhm.
scholar
Yeah.
who's being introduced to philosophical material, and you need to figure out how to integrate the two of them.
Hmm.
Whereas ultimately, I mean, while there was some scholarship among the people who were um, engaging in the Tanya, the vast majority of the people who were gaining, um, who were getting any sort of um, exposure, were for the first time.
Hmm.
Like these were basically poor farmers. Like they may have been tradesmen, right? They may have been merchants, whatever, but they weren't people who were as intellectually engaged as for the guide to the perplexed, More Nevuchim, right? The
Hmm.
More Nevuchim, it, it, I mean, first of all, I haven't actually read the More Nevuchim, but from what I know of it, it assumes that you're having questions because of this conflict.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Tanya starts by presenting you with a question and being like, okay, in your life, how does this question, like, and really that first raita that it brings, like, how should this guide your life, and gives you an explanation for people who are really dealing with this stuff possibly for the very first time.
Mm-hmm. Right. Na Benonim.
Well, so the thing with Benoni is Rav Hillel Paricher, who's one of the great Hasidim of Chabad. He, I think the Rebbe once referred to him as half a Rebbe.
Mm-hmm.
Um, he famously said that uh, before before he read Tanya, he said Halavai Tzaddik. If only
Mm-hmm.
I could be a tzaddik.
Right.
And after reading Tanya, he said Halavai Beinani.
Right.
If only I could be a Beinani.
Mm-hmm.
And that's actually one of the things. Oh, first of all, Rav Hillel Parashcher apparently is one of Yosef's ancestors. So
Really? Wow.
yeah, he's miaches to Rav Hillel Parashcher, which honestly was like, wow, Yosef, now I know why you're such a heilige person. But it always bothered me, like, this story, and I didn't understand why it was called Sefer Beinonim. It's like, well, why not Halavai Tzaddik? Why not, why Halavai Beinani? Like, how does that make sense? And frankly, when it comes to Rav Hillel Parashcher, right? If he says Halavai Beinani, I'm like, Halavai Rasha V'Tovlo, right?
Mm-hmm.
That he gives 5 levels. The
Right.
lowest is Rasha V'Ralo. The next high is Rasha V'Tovlo. So
Mm-hmm.
like Halavai Rasha V'Tovlo, right? But it was only when I actually studied psychology and cognitive behavioral therapy that I found out that actually that's the healthiest
Right.
way of viewing things, is Halavai Beinani. Dan Smith says, I'm glad that this is a book for less intellectual people, as I may be able to study with you guys better. I hate to tell you this, Dan, but yeah. Yeah, hopefully you'll be able to get things out of it, but I'm still trying to, like, whenever I read Tanya, like, I'm it's like, it's deep stuff.
Well, I mean, it's um it's like it's like the metaphor, it's like the parable, but like I think we mentioned it last time, but like even a drop of the medicine,
Yeah,
like the king and his son, even the drop of the medicine will be good.
hopefully, yes.
Yeah.
So I do recommend going back and listening to section 1 if you're interested. But all we did in section 1 was, and right now even we're just we haven't even dug into it. We're reading kind of introductions to it.
Yeah. Okay. So shall I continue?
Yes.
Next, chapters 9 to 17, the author goes on to examine the inevitable conflict ensuing from the two divergent sources of consciousness. He evaluates the relative strength of the two souls and their respective functions, whereby the essential unity of the human personality is strongly upheld. So the two souls is the
animal
divine
soul,
and
the divine soul. Yeah, nefesh halokit and nefesh habehamit.
Experientially, however, the conflict produces a variety of personalities, from one extreme to the other, which the author proceeds to define. His attention is focused on the personality of the Benoni, who just spoke a lot, which falls midway between the extremes. However, in Rabbi Shneur Zalman's definition, the Benoni is not one whose sins and virtues balance, while the tzaddik is a person whose good deeds outweigh his sins, as sometimes defined in the Talmud. The Benoni of the Tanya is a person who exercises complete self-control and never commits a sin knowingly in any of the three areas of human activity: thought, speech, and deed. The Benoni of the Tanya is thus superior to the tzaddik of the Talmud. Nevertheless, our author insists that this ideal personality is within grasp of the average individual, although not without constant effort and vigilance. The underlying doctrine here is that man is essentially and inherently a moral being. Yeah, so he's basically like setting the bar a little higher in a way. Like he's putting it lower, but he's also in a way setting it higher.
So, I mean, I think a lot of times so yesterday in the Bible study, we started talking about this, and I thought this is something we need to talk about more, which is sometimes when we're viewing the things from our standpoint as human beings towards God. And sometimes we are trying to understand things from God's standpoint towards human beings, right? And so actually, it was funny today. Paul Vanderklay had a randos conversation where somebody mentioned this idea, and I was like, did he get that from Tanya? Because Tanya talks about this in a later section. It talks about how, so we're relating to an infinite God, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in comparison to an infinite God, right? Anything finite, right? Whether it's, so compare the number 1 to the number 1,000 to the number 1,000,000 to the number Googleplex to infinite, right? And while in our limited frame, 1,000,000 is a lot more than 1, right?
Mm-hmm.
In comparison to God, the eternal God, right? It's all kalachashiv. It's as if it doesn't count,
Right.
literally, right? Is the Hebrew kalachashiv, and it's and so there are things which we compare from our standpoint, and there are things we compare from God's standpoint, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in God's standpoint, all of our great deeds, right? It's like whatever you do, it's not enough, and any capacity you have to do good things is from God, right? So there is no difference really before God of a sinner or a saint, right?
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, from our standpoint, right, in our limited world, there's a huge difference, right? One person can be a murderer and one person can be a good person, and God, in his infinity, takes into consideration both standpoints because
Right.
he is infinite, right? And where that applies here is, okay, when God judges you, right? He's judging you fairly, and if you are more good than you are evil, then in all fairness, right? Then you are going to receive more reward than punishment,
Mm-hmm.
right? And how exactly God makes that happen is up to him. Yet one of the fundamental principles of Jewish faith is we believe that God punishes the just according to their good deeds.
Right.
Rewards the just according to their good deeds, and punishes the evildoer kerishato, according to his evil, right?
Right.
And beyond that, we also believe God is merciful, so he's actually even nicer than that, and he gives us great reward, like it says in the Ten Commandments, right? He rewards thousands of generations of those who love him, whereas it's only the third and fourth generation of those who hate him, right? So
Yeah.
in that sense, he's merciful more than he is just fair, right? But what Tanya isn't giving us a framework for seeing it in God's justice. It's giving us a framework for understanding from our standpoint what God demands of us. And what God demands of us is, in fact, to be a tzaddik. But because being a tzaddik and even being a Beinoni is such a great level, Tanya gives us a way of seeing ourselves. And Nachmanides, his letter to his son, I don't know if you've read it. I definitely would. It's very short, and it's printed in a lot of sidurim, in a lot of prayer books.
Okay.
And some people read it every week, like it says, because he wrote the letter to his son, and he told in the letter it says, read this every week. And so it's become, a lot of people read it on a weekly basis, but it's worth reading at least once. Like he explains to you how you should view yourself in relation to other people. And that's what Tanya is teaching us is how, not about what God's final judgment on us will be, because by the time you're studying Tanya, it's not about whether or not you're going to hell or not. Like that's not, if you're at the point where, like, we're talking about eternal damnation, like you're not studying Tanya. When you're studying Tanya, you've already expressed a will for understanding God and wanting to know God. And so at this juncture, he is teaching us how we should view ourselves in relation to other people, and in fact, in relation to ourselves. Because another thing that is incredibly important, and I keep on stressing to people for their own psychological health, there's a verse in Proverbs which says, Al tihi tzadik harbe. Don't be too righteous. And it might be one of the most surprising verses in the Bible. Like if a human being was writing the Bible, they would never include the sentence, don't be too righteous. Tzadik harbe. What does it mean? Tzadik harbe. You're right? Yoter midai. Right?
Yeah, it seems like maybe a point, like don't rub it in their faces. Is that kind of like no?
No, it's not. It's beyond that. It's tzaddik harbe is actually a personal thing that you yourself should not hold yourself to too high of a standard.
Okay, got it.
Right? Because if you do, and the rest of the verse says, why would you die? Because it will kill you. Because if you, and I mean, psychological science has proven this more than anything, the wisdom of this, if you hold yourself to a ridiculous standard, a standard of perfection, right? Ein tzaddik ba'aretz velo chata. There's no such thing as a righteous man in the land, and it's interesting that it says ba'aretz, right? Like you live in the world and you don't stumble. Like that's not a possibility. Just accept that. You're going to fail. The question is how much. Like be better than you are, just a tiny bit, not harbe, right?
Right.
Be a tzaddik katzat.
Yeah, it's interesting because just yesterday, and this is another tangent, but just yesterday I was I trying to catch up on the Exodus seminar. I'm watching it with my wife, so we're going through it slowly, kind of whenever we can. And they
Mm,
were at the point where they were talking about Jethro was talking to Moses right before
yeah,
the How Sinai or just
yeah.
after.
I think it's right after. Yeah,
Yeah, in the verses it's right before, but it's right after. Yeah, according to Rashi. So he talks to him and he tells him like Moses is doing everything by himself, or he's like judging everybody and giving them the laws all by himself. And then Jethro tells him, "Kaved alecha." It's too heavy for you. So it feels like that could be related to that of like, yeah, this is too much for even Moses, or like, yeah, even Moses. I guess that's the point. There is like, this is too heavy for you. In Hebrew, it makes more sense, and also, yeah,
yeah,
it's a um, it's an interesting word, kaved and kavod and all that.
yeah.
So that was interesting.
Yeah, no, I mean it's absolutely true. And if you allow that standard of perfection to dominate your mind,
Hmm.
you will end up destroying yourself, which
Right.
is unfortunate.
Hmm. Okay. So, going back to the text, the following chapters, 18 to 25, are designed to support the author's basic theory, namely that the ideal personality of the Benoni is not a mere concept, but one that can actually be realized. To this end, he re examines the functions of the soul, both on the conscious and subconscious level. With regard to the former, the author insists on the supremacy of the intellect. As for the subconscious level, the author draws upon the Zohar for certain mystical categories, such as the innate or hidden love and fear, awe of God. The hidden love provides a subconscious urge for oneness with God. The sense of awe for the divine being provides a dread of separateness. Interesting. This reminds me of what Jordan Peterson talks about when he talks about like the when people write about their future, they write about the good future and the bad, like the heaven and hell.
Yeah, and that's important. I mean,
Yeah.
this so the Baal Shem Tov taught that Ahava Ve'yira are the two wings by which um, the soul flies.
Right. Hmm. Love and awe are therefore not conflicting, but rather complementary categories. The author emphasizes the special and to a considerable extent also hereditary nature of the Jew and his attachment to the idea of the unity of God, originating with the patriarchs. This thought is, in some respects, strongly reminiscent of Halevi's concept of the divine influence. Yuda Halevi, I'm assuming,
Yeah, from the Kuzari, I think. Yeah.
which is on my book list. I feel like that's something that I really want to read. Halevi's concept of the divine influence. Alemal,
So it's the
Al-Amal.
Kuzari was originally written in Judeo-Arabic,
Mm-hmm.
which is a Jewish form of Arabic, and yeah, so I think Al Amar Al Ilahi is in Judeo-Arabic, meaning the godly influence, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know Arabic.
Yeah,
Um,
me neither.
yeah, just to provide some context, which this doesn't, um, and because this is going on the internet. So when we talk in generalities about the sources of souls and inherited um, inherited characteristics, and especially, I mean, um, there are things with constellations and all kinds of spiritual realities that are taught through mystical traditions within Judaism, we are it should be noted and it should be obvious that we are talking in generalities, and the generalities do not necessarily apply to each individual person, right? So, and so, for example, why do if you read Tanya straight out, you would think that there would be no possibility of converting to Judaism, because he talks about the Jewish soul and he talks about the Gentile soul, and it's like, okay, he's saying very definitive things, and it's like, well, then how can someone convert to be a Jew? Like, and that's because there's a presupposition that you understand that we live in a spiritually disconnected time. The Kabbalists talk about the stars, the mazalot, have in fact moved, and there is a bilbul, a confusion in the world where we don't see things, where the kingdom of God on heaven, on earth, is not as it is in heaven, right?
Right.
And so the process of, for example, conversion, right, is a recognition. It's a birur. It's a clarification of the status of a particular soul, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it is not to say at all that, for example, we assume that every Jew is a good person, and later on he will say that Gentiles, rubam kekulam, he says, in the first chapter of Tanya, meaning most, which is to say almost all, right? Do things not for what he calls an inherent willingness to die for God, but rather for their own to protect their own life, for their own purpose, right? So this is a key distinction that he makes in the first chapter between the stereotypical Jewish soul, which is a soul that is willing to die. And in fact, so we have, for Jews, we have a commandment that we are Yahareg val Yavor, that you should be willing to die rather than commit an act of idolatry. Someone says, I'm going to kill you, or you bow down to this statue. You as a Jew and me as a Jew, we are, the demand is, and the hope is, that we have an inherent desire to be willing to die.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas there's actually a discussion, it appears, I mean, the problem is the Noahide laws have not been clarified enough. But in the attempts to clarify the laws for a Noahide law, for Noahides, the question becomes, like, is a Gentile required to Yahareg val Yavor? Obviously has a requirement not to commit idolatry,
Mm-hmm.
but is that something that requires him to be willing to die for it? And generally, it seems that it's not a requirement, which adds the additional question, well, if it's not a requirement, is he allowed to? Right? So if you're not required Yahareg val Yavor, then maybe you should be preserving your life, and you should, in fact, go ahead and bow to that idol, right?
Right.
So like one of the most important things is, yes, we do, and Yosef disagrees with me, and probably Chezi disagrees with me, but generally, I would say that Orthodox Judaism teaches that there are inherent differences, qualitative differences between Jewish souls and Gentile souls. And that's something that a lot of people find very offensive.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sorry if you find it offensive, but I don't care because this is Torah and I believe in Torah. And like your offense is not is not what's going to be. It, so I'm not sugarcoating anything. I am explaining things as I understand them to be true, right?
Right.
At the same time, I think it's very easy, and again, people often like first chapter of Tanya. It's one of the questions you get from the people who are seeking things because of what he says. Hello, Chad. I love you. Uh, at the same time, I think that an understanding that a lot of people get if they're not actually well versed in Judaism is that Judaism has always believed that, in fact, that God, it actually says in the Bible, God is, well, see, that's the thing. It's not that, and this is what I'm trying to explain. It's not that we believe that there are second class souls. There aren't. And in fact, I translated a mimer of the Mittler Rebbe. No, it wasn't. It was the Rebbe Maharash, and I sent it to Chad. Not that I expected him to read it because it's very complex Kabbalistic stuff that I don't understand myself. Right, where he talks about, and this is another question I get. I used to get when I was on campus as a assistant rabbi. I would get questions like people would come up to me and say, "Is it true you believe that stones have souls?" And in a sense, yes, we believe stones have souls. We believe that in order to exist, there is an animating force from God which allows you to exist. And so there is no such thing as a second class soul. And I often point, no, not even lower tier soul. I often point to 1 Corinthians 12, which is the oldest source I can find, written source I can find, which teaches a very important Jewish teaching, which is that all of humanity being descended from Adam, right? All of humanity being descended from Adam has its role in the world, and it's okay, happy to be of service. No, that is the point. That is the point. Each soul has its particular role, and they are different from each other.
Right. So when you say just, so I don't know too much about this, so I'm not unable to agree or disagree. I'm just curious. But when you say qualitative difference, obviously I can see that interpreted in various ways. But is this, to make the analogy of the Kohanim and Bnei Israel, is that something relevant?
That's very, so within Israel, we have Kohen Levi Israel, and that is very relevant. I mean, ultimately, yeah, I think that's very relevant and analogous, right? So
right, so it's not like the Kohanim are like super Jews in every regard. They have, I mean, again,
they're not super. I mean, so a Kohen, and this is one of the jokes I make about Chezi's father, right? I say the reason he can't be Mashiach is because he's a Levi. The other qualifications I don't mind. Like Chazkat Mashiach, I'm fine, but he's a Levi,
Mhm.
right? And so just to answer Dan's previous question before, do Gentiles also have a good inclination and the opposite one? Yes, definitely. And if all mankind root from one person, why are scientists so baffled how similar objects of human building can be found all over the world? Well, that's a whole other thing. But in other words, no beans, no burrito, no beef, no burrito, yada yada. Yes, that's so. I often make the comparison between, okay, heart muscles are very important muscles, right? But if all of your muscles were heart muscles, your body would suck, right? And
Right.
you need neurons and you need fat cells and you have all the different types of cells which make up your body. And that's what First Corinthians 12 talks about. And actually, one of the things, so you may have heard, Hakol kol Yaakov, v'hayadayim yedei Esav,
Okay.
right? This famous saying, Isaac says to Jacob, the voice is the voice of Jacob, and the hands are the hands of Esav, right? So one of the things we say is Israel is same otiot, it's the same letters as li rosh, my
Mhm.
head, right? So we have this concept that, in fact, Israel is rosh, is the first, is the head, and that Esav is Yadayim, right? And or it can also, there's various body parts, and the hands, you can reach up with your hands in a way that you cannot with your head. Your hands can go above your head, right? And so each person has a particular capacity that another person does not, and a particular role that another person does not. And the important thing is, in fact, to find your proper place in the world and to contribute in the way that God has given you a capacity to contribute.
Yeah. I mean,
And to tie back to what I was saying at the very beginning, we live in a time of particular darkness where it is not clear at all who belongs where. And that's why there's a strong belief that once Mashiach comes, there will no longer be conversions. We will no longer allow people to convert to Judaism.
mhm.
Chad says that this makes sense to me. I think technically there's no two identical things anywhere ever, not even particles. Yeah, but, and again, to go back to where I started, there's an important idea that when we are talking, as we will be, about generalities, you have to start with understanding that a generality is in fact just a generality, and all generalities fail to capture each particular detail. And that's why I felt I had to give that preamble right now, because we're going to be going into a lot of things about souls. And yeah, like it's right there in the first chapter, and that line where he says Rubam kekulam, right? I get that question constantly.
Mhm. Cool. Well, I appreciate it.
Okay. Did you
I-
have anything you wanted to add or ask about before we keep on moving?
no, I think I'm good. Yeah. So let's continue. In this connection, the doctrine of divine unity comes under this discussion. So, however, never losing sight of the practical, the author discusses certain states of mind which have a direct bearing on the quest for personal unity, as a prelude to unity in the cosmic order, which in turn is sine qua non for the realization of the divine unity. Write
Sine
down.
qua non means the ultimate example, like no other, of
Right.
divine unity. So basically, what he's saying here is that Adam ke'olam, right? It's
Hmm.
actually, maybe I should pull this. You know what? Let me pull this Mishnah up. Um, uh, where was this Mishnah? 4, 5. Yeah. Okay. So we will read it in English. So
Hmm.
might as well start in the beginning. How do we instill fear? How do we warn witnesses in capital cases? This is the Mishnah in Sanhedrin 4:5. Um, they would bring them in and instill fear in them, saying, "Lest you offer testimony that includes inductive inference, da 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 da." Right? Tell them all the things they should not do. Um, because if you testify falsely, people like. I mean, I highly recommend people read this themselves in context. Here is the link, but um, another explanation of plural form deme, right, for his blood spatter. Okay.
Yeah.
It was for this reason that man was created unique, to teach you that anyone who destroys one life from the Jewish people is considered by Scripture to have destroyed an entire world. And anyone who saves one life from the Jewish people is as if he saved an entire world. And also to promote peace among people, that no one will say to his fellow, "My ancestors are greater than yours." And also so that sectarians will not say, "There are many powers in heaven." And also to express the grandeur of the Holy One, blessed be He. For a man strikes many coins from the same die, the same cast, right? And all the coins are alike. Whereas the King of Kings, the Holy One, blessed be He, struck every man from the die of the first man, Adam, and yet no man is quite like his fellow. Therefore, every person is obligated to say, "For me the world was created." And lest you say, "Why must we go through all this trouble?" Has it not already been said? He being so it's going back to the witnesses, right? But this part, right? Why was man created alone? He was created alone so that, for two reasons, so that each of us understands how important we are,
Hmm.
that each person should understand that the entirety of creation depends upon him, and so that we nobody says, "Ah, God loves me more, I'm descended from Abraham,
Right.
God created Abraham," right? You're descended from somebody else. We are all children of the same God.
Right. So
Now,
the world was created for you does not only apply to you. It applies to each and every single person that you.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, and that does not mean that we don't believe any Beni Bechori Israel, that Israel is the firstborn son of God.
Hmm.
And because we do believe that we were given the Torah first, and we have a special role as Bechor, as the firstborn of God. Yet you see throughout the Bible that there's actually a subversion there with the Bechorah, Esav and Jacob, and it's actually a theme throughout the Bible,
Right. Yeah.
this conflict, right, between being born as with the Bechorah, being born with a certain yichus, which we believe that yes, we have, and actually living up to it, which hopefully we do, but often do not.
Yeah.
If your ancestors are Adam created by God and mine are apes, whose ancestors are greater? Yeah, that's a famous thing with evolution and Darwinism and stuff. But like ultimately, even the Darwinists believe that human beings, well, I guess not with the Neanderthals, but they believe that Homo sapiens sapiens, at least, all of us do descend from the same um, ultimate Adam and Eve. Not, it
Right.
wasn't parallel. Anyway, parallel species. Anyway, so all of that to clarify all of that.
Cool. So
We always stick straight to what we were talking about. We never veer off
yeah,
in any direction. Yeah.
and we will eventually get to the actual.
Oh, yeah. Oh, so going back to what we were talking about.
Mhm.
So, in a very real sense, if you are able to conquer the evil within yourself, I mean, it's almost like Solzhenitsyn says, right? The line between good and evil
Right.
is through each man's heart, right?
Right.
If you are able to perfect yourself, if you are able to make yourself, then in a very real sense, the entire world is, because you're supposed to say Bishvili nivra ha'olam,
Right.
that God created the world for me.
set your house in order. Set your room
Yeah.
in order. Yeah.
And that sets the entire world in order. And actually, I mean, Maimonides brings this down as a halacha, and it's in
Mhm.
Pirkei Avot. This is a very basic teaching in Judaism, that clean your room.
Okay. Back to the text.
Yeah.
He, the author, offers a series of practical suggestions to attain mental and emotional stability and inner harmony. The emphasis is on joy, stemming from an intellectually achieved faith, while sadness and dejection are severely censored. All this.
Censured. Yeah.
Sorry?
Censured, meaning to censor means to not allow people to read it. To censure means to say that's a bad thing.
Okay, so really censored.
Yeah.
All this forms the subject matter of chapters 26 to 31. Right. Chapter 32 stands out by itself as an interpolation not immediately related to the specific discussion. The careful student will note that chapter 31 is more directly continued in chapter 33. It would appear that the author chose to include this particular chapter parenthetically, as it were, in order to give emphasis at this point to one of the cardinal teachings of the Baal Shem Tov, which is a cornerstone of Hasidut, and which receives special attention in Chabad. We refer to the subject of Ahavat Israel, love for fellow Jew. I'm assuming Leviticus is pointing V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, or maybe not.
I believe so. Let me check. It said Leviticus 18:19. This can't possibly be the correct. This is not the correct.
Yeah, but I think this is
maybe the Kamocha. There are actually several places where this is a thing. Yeah.
In his familiar way, our author gives this precept a mystical ethical exposition based on the close soul relationship within the community of Israel, to which he alluded in his foreword and chapter 2, and which now receives fuller treatment in this chapter. Hence, some leading Hasidim note the significance of the number of this chapter, 32, corresponding to the Hebrew word lev, heart.
Yeah. So oftentimes Chabad Hasidim will say that this chapter is the lev, is the heart of Tanya.
Mm-hmm.
Chapter 32. Yeah.
The drama of the interpersonal conflict leads the author to an examination of men's destiny, the meaning and purpose of life, and men's place in the cosmic order. So men's destiny, meaning and purpose of life, and man's place in the cosmic order. Okay. These problems are dealt with in chapters 33 to 37. In the last of these, the author outlines his concept of the messianic era and the resurrection, when the cosmic order will have attained the acme of perfection and fulfillment as a direct result of men's conscious effort to work towards that goal. At this point, the author might have concluded his treatise. However, he is not content with leaving us with the impression that life is merely a prelude to afterlife. There must be more to life and to religious experience than serving merely as a means to an end. In the next and last 15 chapters of his work, the author evolves his concept of the kingdom of heaven on earth in the here and now. In his daily life, man is offered a foretaste of the afterlife, and in some respects, it is of a quality surpassing even the spiritual bliss of the hereafter. The author therefore takes up again those categories of men's spiritual phenomena which enable him to transcend his physical limitations and to partake of the supernatural in this life. Here again, the mystic is very much in evidence. The author provides new insights into the concept of kavanah, the intention which must accompany every human act, which is the vehicle of transcendence, which he covers in 38 to 40. He discusses the various qualities of fear, awe, and love, and introduces also the quality of mercy as the basic elements of this transcendency, as innate qualities in human nature to leap over the gulf that separates the created from the creator, and to come in direct contact with the Ein Sof, the limitless, chapters 41 to 47. Okay, interesting. So the next two chapters, 48 to 49, are devoted to the all-important Lurianic doctrine of Tzimtzum, which in the author's system holds the key to both the mystery of creation and the destiny of man. Both man and the world in which he lives are two-dimensional creatures of matter and spirit. The tension that inheres in such an order can be relieved only by spiritualizing the material. So this is a lot of what we're talking about in halachic man too.
Yeah, halachic man in a very real sense. First of all, it quotes extensively from Tanya,
right?
But in a very real sense, is also a refutation of Tanya, because the Rav came from Brisk, right? He's a nephew of Rav Chaim Volozhiner, who wrote the Nefesh HaChaim.
Mm-hmm.
And the Nefesh HaChaim, although Tanya and Nefesh HaChaim do not mention each other, they are in fact very much competing visions of Jewish hashkafa, of Jewish philosophy.
Right. I feel like this is, and I think I heard this before, but I think this the example, the story of I don't remember the individuals, but there's a rabbi that, or a talmid that reads the Talmud, and then he looks up and looks at something like at a tree or something, and he's rebuked by another person, another rabbi. And I feel like that's the difference. When you say refute, that's the difference. So like halachic man doesn't want anybody to look beyond, I'm generalizing, beyond the text. And the Tanya assumes that you can look beyond the text, you can look at the tree. If the tree helps you learn more about the text, or kind of like enriches your understanding, like you're reading it and you're looking. But like the halachic man is like, just look at the text. That's all you need. Don't enjoy the tree in a very brisker way, but like I don't know.
I don't know. I mean, ultimately, I think I don't want to misstate the I mean, I kind of wish either Yosef or Chazi were here, because they're Lithuanian, and it's very easy for me to be kind of dismissive, and I don't want to strawman the Lithuanian position, especially the modern Orthodox position, because modern Orthodoxy, like you see, the Rav was very much into um, actually, like, he knew all the philosophers of Western philosophers,
Right.
Kierkegaard and Hegel and all that stuff, right? And he was very involved in that. And there's a video I keep on, like, it keeps on coming up. The Rav came and visited the Rebbe, and the Rebbe, like, first of all, they knew each other before the Rebbe became Rebbe, when both of them were in either Paris or Berlin. I forget where exactly they were both studying at the time in college. But like, there is a disagreement that is very much like within the Daled Amot of 4 cubits of halacha, right? Yeah. It's the disagreement is so, like, there are people who learn Tanya and Nefesh HaChaim, right? And they're like, what are these guys arguing about, right? I think I told you, like, in yeshiva, I once I referred to a Nefesh HaChaim shiur as a Tanya shiur,
Right.
And my rabbi laughed. It's like, yeah, they're so alike. It's hard for us to actually, like, distinguish between the two of them. But partially, I think that also comes from the fact that the two of them have realigned the Jewish world so much that we are used to standing between these two lights and looking at them. Whereas if you were standing outside of either one, you could see how each one was trying to move you in a certain way, right?
Right.
Once you're standing between the two lights, each of them appears to be a bright light, right, guiding your way. But there is a difference there. There is and understanding that and keeping the two. So one of the most important things, when you start studying Talmud, one of the most important things is that the Talmud does is explain mar leshitate, that whenever someone says something, it says, oh, okay, so this is the follow through from Rabbi Akiva or Rabbi Meir, let's say, right? Rabbi Akiva had this guiding principle, and so that's why in this case he believes like this, and why Rabbi Akiva believes like that, right? And being able to keep all of these shitot, like different shitot, in mind, and understanding how they each apply, and then applying the both of them with this concept of elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chayim, right? This and this are the words of the living God.
Yeah.
Like, that itself is part of what makes Talmudic study both difficult but also mind-blowing.
Yeah.
I hope you guys can't hear Shadow playing in the background. She's decided to play with her toys, and it's kind of loud here. That's why I've been turning off my mic.
Yeah. I can hear it a little bit, but it's not disturbing.
Okay.
It's not continuing. Yeah. And I think I can highlight this. Yeah. If I could comment on the comment of Dan, I think that it's interesting to me, like in the Talmud, I don't know if this was in the Talmud, it might have been somewhere else, but Part of making that case like extreme of like that person being rebuked for looking at the tree is just to explore that polarity to then allow us to discover the golden mean, or like the center, the best way to do that. And I mean, the way that I mentioned it is also kind of like I might have been strawmanning a little bit, but it's only because I'm just trying to express it.
So I don't actually. It's been a while since I read Halachic Man, so I don't know if this is the particular story. And in fact, I think Tanya does mention this story that I'm going to say, which was that Rava was was always learning Torah to the point where the Malach HaMavet was not able to reach him. That the angel of death was not able to reach him because he was constantly learning Torah.
That's a great skit. I can see that like he's reading the book and the Malach Hadad is like standing behind him trying to
like waiting, yeah. And
yeah.
so the story, I believe, in the Talmud goes that the Malach HaMavet like destroys a tree, like the tree either died or exploded or something, and Rava stops learning Torah to look at this tree, and that's when death is able to overtake him, right? I think this is actually in the first chapter or first few chapters of Tanya. We'll get there hopefully within the next couple of years. But if I understand the Rav correctly and in context, there is an idea that like really the halachic man is like the world is a distraction from what we are supposed to be doing. And so part of the Lithuanian Mahalach, right, the way the Lithuanian yeshivas were set up was, and to some extent they still are, is okay, you need to be learning Torah. You need to be learning Torah. That's the most important thing. That's the most important thing. And Hasidism was a populist movement which emphasized the avoda, the work that the simple Jew, right, the person who wasn't a great scholar, does in his daily life, right? And so, yeah, I think that might be more of the difference between what the Rav is saying and what Hasidus would teach.
Yeah, and I think we can say yes to both approaches because, and I think this connects to our discussion at the beginning about different roles for different souls.
Yeah.
Is some people do that, and this can also get political, right? I mean, this is very relevant to
Israeli politics today.
Right,
yes.
Yeah, so
yes. That's why Chezi and I end up screaming at each other so much.
So yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, you haven't stuck your head into the Israeli politics stuff yet.
Yeah, I'm not, because it's like I'm not really too.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It's good. Stay away from politics.
Yeah. Okay, so I think I am. Well, we stopped at men's moral acts must be holy acts, which is a little lower than this. Yeah.
Where? Oh, okay. Sorry. Okay.
Wait, did we?
Maybe we may have started. Hold on. This is your command.
Similar to the key to the creation destiny, both man and the woman should to do. Man is an inspired to achieve personal insight. He becomes his. No, okay.
I think we stopped at fulfillment.
Fulfillment?
Yeah. To be a true master of the world, I believe. I think that's where we started to talk about like being involved in creation and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay. We can read it again.
Yeah. So to be a true master of the world, which the Creator had entrusted in his hand, man must first be master of himself. Creation is seen as a process leading from God to man, fulfillment is seen as a process leading from men to God. The process leading from God to men is one of materializing the spiritual. That leading from men to God, one of spiritualizing the material. For men, yeah, that's very interesting. There is a community of interests, as it were, between the Creator and his counterpart on earth. A community of interests which is realizable because of a community of nature. Since man partakes in the divine nature, by reason of the fact that his soul is a part of godliness, as God concerns himself with human affairs. Man's moral acts must be holy acts. The good and the holy are identical. Man's duty and purpose in life is to identify himself with his Creator through identifying his will with that of his Creator. Man is the divine instrument to make this world a fitting abode for Shekhinah, Dira B'Tachtonim, which we spoke about before, divine presence, in which both man and God can share intimately and fully in complete harmony and union. On this mystical note, the final chapters 50 to 53 of the treatise conclude.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we can skip the approbations. The approbations were by Rab Zusha of Anipoli, the famous Rab Zusha. And if I
Why
remember
weren't you more Zusha?
what?
Why weren't
Yeah,
you more Zusha? Okay.
Yeah, why weren't you Zusha? Yes, that's
Okay.
that Rav Zusha, and I think who else wrote? I don't think most people are interested in the approbations, but yeah, Yehuda Leib HaKohen. I forget who that was. Anyway, okay, we'll move on to the compilers forward. Can we skip this? I think we can skip this. I forget who wrote the compilers forward. I think it was his sons. We'll skip the thing. Well, let's go to chapter 1. Okay, Tanya. So this is where we get the word Tanya from.
Yeah.
Tanya. It is we have learned, or it was taught. Besof Perak Shlishi de Nida, at the end of the 3rd chapter of Nida, Mashpin Oto, they make him swear, Tehi Tzaddik Ba'al Tehi Rasha. Be a good person and don't be a bad person. Va'afilu kol ha'olam kulo omrim lacha tzadikata, and even if the entire world tell you that you are a righteous person, heyeh be'enecha karasha. Be to yourself, see yourself as a evil person. V'tzarech lahavin, and it's necessary to understand. The ha-tanan avot perik sheni, that we are also taught in a Mishnah in Avot. Ve'al tehi rasha b'fnei atzmacha. It says, don't regard yourself as a rasha. V'gam im yihyeh be'enav kerasha. And if you think of yourself as an evildoer, yira levavo v'yeh atzev. Your heart will be grieved and you will become depressed. V'lo yuchal lavod Hashem besimcha uvtuv levav, and would not be able to serve God with happiness and with a contented heart, which are requirements.
Right. So that's kind of like the first chapter over. He talks about kind of like one of the main thrusts that also the Alter Rebbe is working maybe at that time against, which is like the be more focused about, like, I think kind of what you referred to, be more focused about what you couldn't do,
Mhm.
or the sins that you had, and then like how that kind of like pulls you down,
Right.
as opposed to being able to use joy, simcha, to do better.
Right. So I mean, he's basically he's bringing the contradiction of what 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 are you supposed to do with the fact that you realize you are not a perfect person, and you should understand that you are not a perfect person. It is a
Mhm.
requirement of halacha that you, even if everybody tells you that you are a tzaddik, you should not. But like, but if you do that and you sincerely view yourself as a rasha, right? There is an actual mitzvah um, of uh, avodat Hashem besimcha, of joyously,
Right.
right? So, I mean, yeah, and he's going to make this even a stronger question. And
Mhm.
really, I mean, I did not appreciate until I started learning some Talmud how um, how this is at very Talmudic beginning. You take two teachings
Mhm.
and you show how they appear to be contradictory and the real contradictions. And then when you resolve them, you don't resolve them in such a way as it in order to like get rid of the question. The question doesn't go away. It's that the question brings you to a higher understanding, which is brings you to a higher understanding, which required that question to get to the answer,
Right.
right? Kind of like you could say it's a little bit like the Socratic method, but unfortunately, a lot of time in the Socratic method, you ask someone a question in order for them to realize, oh, I made a mistake, right?
Right.
And this isn't about the question, the controversy isn't a question of mistake. It's a question of there being a real conflict between two important values,
Mhm.
and not removing the two, either one of the values, but appreciating how that paradox can in fact lead you to a better and higher understanding of
Right.
where you need to be.
Yeah, because probably knowing those, and I mean, it helps situate yourself. And I'm thinking about it because this also reminds me of, I'm going through like I'm listening to Shmona Prakim, or Rabbi Breitowitz talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's how you say that. Rambam.
Yeah, Shmona Perkin. Yeah, the
Yeah,
eight
and he
chapters.
talks there in one place. He talks about how the Rambam uses Aristotle's, or presumably uses Aristotle's golden mean,
Mm-hmm.
to talk about various virtues,
Mm-hmm.
and one of them is humility. And
Mm-hmm.
humility is not that you say, "Oh, I'm no tzaddik." Not because, I mean, there is a form of humblement,
Humility.
humility, that
Yeah.
that you know where you're at, or you understand your capabilities. You don't need
Mm-hmm.
to diminish yourself, be like even beyond that.
Yeah.
So that was interesting.
Yeah. So Hasidic philosophy um, distinguishes between anava,
Hmm.
humility, and shiflut, which I
Right.
don't even know how to translate shiflut. But shiflut is when you see yourself as less than you are.
Hmm.
And that's not a good form of humility. When one of the things, whenever somebody says I am the greatest of sinners, I'm like, hold on here. No, Jeffrey Dahmer, there are, I could name much bigger sinners than you. Stop priding yourself in your capacity to sin.
Right.
you 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 haven't murdered, raped, and eaten people, not necessarily in that order. So don't tell me you're the greatest of sinners, right? That's shiflut. I'm the greatest of sinners. You're not the greatest of sinners. Understand that with the capacities that God gave you, thank God I was never the type of person who could ever do something like that, right? And that in a sense makes me a better person than Jeffrey Dahmer, but I also was never in a situation where I was capable of that sort of horror, right? That's humility, right? Understanding, yes, I didn't get here because, like, and I have to say, going back to the whole discussion between Jew and Gentile, right? There is a value to this idea of a hereditary priesthood, right? A person, like, I have family, they are Kohanim, and because they are Kohanim, right, there are certain kibudim that they receive, right? The specific kavod that you give to a Kohen, but, like, I know it's just the fact that he was born that way, right? And similarly, right, there are things you are born with, which, thank God, I was born with certain riches. We were given the Torah, and we have this beautiful thing, which is amazing. But it was a Yerusha, and somebody who was born in the middle of the Amazon, like, I can't say, I'm a more moral person than that person who is in the middle of the Amazon and doesn't have all of the teachings of the Torah, right? Because it's not something I did, right? So yeah, all of that. Back to the question. Ve'im lo yira levavo klal mizeh, and if, let's say, you think you are a rasha and you don't become grieved, right? Yachol lavo liyidei kalut chas v'shalom, then he could come to frivolity or irreverence, I guess they translated it. Chas v'shalom, God forbid. Ha'inyan. So that's the question, right? How do you understand this shvuah, this oath that your soul took before you were brought into the world, that you will be a tzaddik, not a rasha, but even if everyone tells you you are a tzaddik, you should be in your own eyes as a rasha, right? So now, and honestly, the rest of the book, he's going to explain how that is. Ha'inyan. However, the above matter can be clearly understood. Ki hine matzinu begamara chamisha chalukot. So the Talmud has five gradations, I could say, of people. Tzaddik v'tovlo, tzaddik v'ralo, rasha v'tovlo, rasha v'ralo, uveinoni, right? So you have a tzaddik, you have a righteous person, and what exactly it means, v'tovlo, that it is good for him, right? Or good is his. Tzaddik v'ralo, right? Or evil has him, or he has evil, like what exactly that means, we'll get into. Similarly, you have the same two differences by the rasha, by an evil person, right? The tovlo or ralo, and then a beinoni, and then a person who is the intermediate man, right? The beinoni, and that's what this whole thing is about. And Hillel Parcher, he said, Halavai beinoni. If only I could live up to being a beinoni. Upershu b'gamara, and in the Talmud, Barachot 7a, it explains, Tzaddik v'tovlo, Tzaddik gamor. That Tzaddik v'tovlo, what does that mean? That he is completely a Tzaddik, right? Gamor. Tzaddik veralo tzaddik she'eno gamor. That's a righteous person who is somehow incomplete, is not gamor. Uvaraya mehemna parshat mishpatim, and in the Zohar Parash, it explains tzaddik veralo shahara shabo kafuf letov v'chulu. It explains there, what does it mean that it is tzaddik veralo? Means that it is a person who there is some form of evil within him, but it has been kafuf, it has been subjugated, right? It is made subservient to that which is good. Okay?
Yeah.
Uv Gemara sof perek tishida brachot, and in the Talmud in Brachot chapter 9, the end, it says tzaddikim yetzer tov shoftan. It says that righteous people, their good inclination rules over them. Rishaim yetzer hara shoftan. That by evil people, their evil inclination rules over them or judges them. Beinoni ze veze shoftan, right? That they are ruled over or judged by both.
Okay, so just to cover this, I don't know if it continues to cover, but just also for me to kind of like lay this out. So we have tzaddik v'tovlo. So I don't know if they went through it, but my understanding of it is that basically the evil inclination like is not there for him to subdue anymore. In a way.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
And then tzaddik veralo is one that is the evil inclinations are subjugated. We just said.
Right.
And then the next level is Beinoni. And then it's
Rasha
V'Tovlo, which means what?
So that is a Rasha is somebody who does sin, but mostly is ruled over by his good inclination. So the way we have a Beinoni, I mean, ultimately that he's going to explain it, a Beinoni doesn't even sin at all, right? It's not that a Beinoni sins. It's that there is a possibility of sin. Whereas a tzaddik veralo, right, there isn't even a possibility of sin, right? This is, I mean, a basic teaching of Chassidut, that a person who's born a tzaddik, right, that tzaddikim are born, they're not made. Tzaddikim are people who, like, it is a soul that comes from such a place. Well, okay, I have to clarify this. So obviously every human being does have free choice, because the Torah says, and this is an important klal, an important rule in the Torah, that hakol b'dei shamayim chutz mirat shamayim. Everything is in the hands of heaven other than the fear of heaven. Okay?
Right.
However, God, in his infinite wisdom, knows his creations and he is outside of time, and he arranges the world in such a way that the tzaddikim are where they need to be, right? And the Talmud says, Ra Kadosh Baruch Hu, that God saw tzaddikim mu'atim hem, that there are very few righteous people. Pazran bechol dor v'dor, right? He spread some out in each generation, and that's this idea of the Lamed Vav tzaddikim, the 36 tzaddikim in each generation, right? God made sure there are 36 tzaddikim in each generation so that the world could last, because in a very real sense, we believe that if at any moment there is no Torah, there is no person, and that's what we mean by tzaddik yesod olam, right? That a tzaddik, that a righteous person, is the foundation of the world,
Mm-hmm.
right? Without a tzaddik, the world would cease to exist. So God made it so there are some tzaddikim, there are lamed vav tzaddikim at the very least. That's a tzaddik. That's something beyond us, like, okay, that's not us. That's the tzaddik. For us, we have to struggle, and if we are able to struggle enough that we don't sin, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then, I mean, if we are in fact able to, like, but even that's not within our capacity to turn our Yetzer Ra into Yetzer Tov. At the very least, we can hopefully reach the level of Beinani, right? And if we cannot reach even Beinani, we can reach Rasha V'Tovlo,
Mm-hmm.
right? Who, even though he may sin, ultimately repents.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I can see how this sounds a little bleak, but I guess it would be good. It would be good to really clarify. I mean, throughout the book, to kind of like understand what the Benoni is and what responsibility the Benoni is. Because when I say I want to be a tzaddik, part of it is probably my ego saying I want to be that person that people say is like.
So I had the same thing. I mean, honestly, this was one of my major problems with thing, and it wasn't until I had both experienced depression and really it was at we had a Yortzeit, we had a levaya leilui neshama of a friend of an acquaintance of mine from college who committed suicide. And so, and I've discussed this several times on this channel, but that was when I realized, cognitive behavioral therapy really teaches us to view the world
Mm-hmm.
not in this stark black and white,
right?
But so the healthiest psychology, and honestly, so Carl Jung on his 80th birthday did an interview. I've read it before on here. He did an interview where he said to the interviewer that there was a rabbi in the 18th century who anticipated the entirety of his psychology, right? And that was and he was called the Heilige Magid. He was the great Magid of Mizrich. Now, we don't actually have very many writings of the Magid of Mizrich. We don't have his teachings.
Mm-hmm.
So the only way that Jung could have been talking about the actual teachings of the Magid is through his students. And there were other students than the Alter Rebbe, but Tanya may be the most clear exposition of the psychological teachings of the Magid.
Right.
And it was only when I studied psychology and what it takes to have a healthy psychology that I started to understand, like this frame of looking at things, halavai beinani, right? Mm-hmm. And not being tzaddik harbe, not looking, not trying to be that tzaddik,
right?
Trying to be a beinani, right? That this is a far more healthy psychology. That, I mean, so CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, it's the only type of therapy that we know that works as well as psychotropic medicine. Like
Right.
it's amazing that it works, but it
Yeah.
does. And for me, this was like, oh my god, like all of these things which I thought, like, why is it Sefer Shel Beinonim? Well, what, like, it actually bothered me that Rav Hillel Paricher would say Halavai Beinoni,
Hmm.
right? Because so Yosef knew that he was descended from Reb Hillel, but he didn't really know much about Reb Hillel because he's not in Chabad. And so I went to look up like the books that Reb Hillel, like there are 8 volumes of his writings. This was one of the great Hasidim in Chabad, one of the great like luminaries in Judaism, and he says, "Halavai Beinani." If only I was a Beinani. And it's like, and honestly, it's like we're just about to get right. Rava says, "Kagon ana Beinani," like I'm an intermediate, and Abaya says to him, "Lo shavik mar chaya l'chol birya." Like you're not letting anyone like live. If you're a Bainani, like what are the rest of us, right?
Yeah.
It really bothered me. And it was only through understanding how much healthier it is that I understood that in fact it was, I feel, for the meaning crisis, like the Alter Rebbe 200 years ago, like anticipated the necessity for this teaching to get out in the world.
Yeah. I feel like part of that point, two things that come up for me that are just relevant. Well, one is more relevant to you, but the I'm blanking on the myth now. But flying too close to the sun.
Yeah.
Um,
Icarus.
Icarus, yeah, sorry, is a kind of relevant analogy or parallel. And also, I was trying to think about the startup world and companies and growing fast. You know, and there are a lot of companies that just grow fast. They get investments, they run through money, and their goal is to be the best. Let's say the best company, the leading company in like health tech. I don't know what, you know.
Yeah.
And for most of those companies, the majority, klal kikulam, it burns them. Like long term, they do not exist. They don't get to do what they want to do because it's just too. They really
Yeah.
get burned. So and they fall apart. So, and there are smaller companies that have these smaller goals, but that or lower goals, but that are gradations or like there are steps towards something a lot bigger. And from like a step in the middle, it's more possible for you to just reach that other step that you might want to get to at the end. So that was interesting to me.
Yeah, I'm constantly saying to people, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good,
Mm-hmm.
because in and allow incremental change and just be a little bit better than you are. You don't have to be a lot better than you are. You just have to be a little bit better than you are. And that little bit is in fact far more psychologically healthy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's keep on going. So, like I said, Amar Rava kagon ana Beinani. So Rava, right? He says, I'm a Beinani, right? And as we'll explain, like Abaya answers him. He says, Lo shavik mar chaya l'chol birya, right? That look, if you're saying you're a Beinani, what are the rest of us gonna do, right? V'lahavin calls that Bayer Hatev, and to understand this stuff well, v'gam lahavin masha amar Eov, and also to understand what Job said, apparently according to the Talmud in Baba Batra, Ribono shel olam barata tzadikim barata rishaim. Um, um, Ribono shel olam, Lord of the universe, Master of the universe, you created the righteous people and the wicked people. Vaha tzadik v'rasha lo ka'amar, and it's being medayek. It's focusing on the fact that it says tzadikim and rashaim. It doesn't say tzadik v'rasha. V'gam lahavin mahut madragat habeinoni, and to understand the essential nature of the level of rank of Beinoni, Shabavadai Eino Mechza Zachiyot or Mechza Avonot. We're not talking about somebody who is half good deeds and half sins. She'im kan Ech Ta'arava Ba'atzmo Lomar Shehu Beinoni. And this was always one of my questions as well. I was like, okay, like we have this concept of Yeridat Hadorot, like to say that Rava was mistaken for an Acharon like the Alter Rebbe, it's a bit much. But like afterwards, after I studied some psychology and understood depression better, I was like, okay, I understand what he's saying. V'noda de la pasik pume migirsa. And it is known that his mouth never ceased from girsa, from repeating the Torah that he was learning. Ad afilu malach hamavet lo haya yachol lishlot bo, that the angel of death didn't have a chance to take him.
Right, and this is kind of what
that's what I was talking about as far as the tree and the Ve'ech haya yachol lit'ot b'mechza avonot chas v'shalom. And would he have thought, oh, if a Beinoni is somebody whose who sins half the time, it's like, could he really have thought that?
Yeah.
Ve'od shehare b'sha'a she'oseh avonot nikra rasha gamor. And we have this idea that when you are sinning, you are considered a rasha, but when you repent, you are considered tzaddik. Ve'im achar kach asa teshuva nikra tzaddik gamor, right? And this is in fact the way. So even if I drive to a synagogue on the Sabbath, they will still give me an aliyah, right? Why? Because when I am standing there getting an aliyah, right, at that moment, I'm not sinning, right? Baruch Hashem, there are at least in my dreams, I am shomer Shabbat. At least 8 hours every Shabbat, I keep Shabbat. Va'afilu ha'over al isur kal shel divrei sofrim. And even someone who is who transgresses even a small rabbinic command, mikre rasha, that person is called an evildoer. Kedeita beperek bet the Yevamot uberek perek kama danida, like in the Talmud it explains. Va'afilu mi sheyesh beyado limchot velo micha nikra rasha. And so even if you didn't actually do any sins, but there was somebody who would actually listen to you when he was sinning, and you didn't tell him don't sin, right? That person is even called a rasha.
Right. That's the don't put a stumbling block.
No. So that's a different thing. That's stumbling block is to cause somebody else to sin.
Rebuke your brother.
This is hochiach tochiach.
Yeah.
You shall surely rebuke your brother, right? If you have the capacity to change someone's mind from their sins, then you have an obligation to, in fact, change their mind.
I have my wife and I have a discussion about, we're trying to understand the rebuke, lashon hara, and how does all of that interact Like if like for an example, like if you have a boss that is like is bad, how do you, if you have a boss that is bad, and you have a friend that is going, a colleague that is going to join, maybe be that under that boss
Mhm.
as a supervisor, like are you gonna warn? Should you warn your friend? Is that lashon hara, or
Okay, so
how
the
do
rules of lashon hara are very, very complicated.
you? Mm-hmm.
Although I highly recommend, there is a perek in the Mishneh Torah which briefly explains the rules of the lashon hara.
Briefly, do you mean 3 chapters? And
No, it's actually only one chapter. Yeah, but the Chofetz Chaim, right? He is best known for his book, the Chafetz Chaim, which is all the laws of lashon hara. Now,
Mhm.
first thing to understand about lashon hara is that it is not motzi shemra. So motzi shemra is when you are actually saying a lie about somebody.
Right.
Lashon hara is when it's true,
Mm-hmm.
and you are forbidden to say, to speak lashon hara, with two very important exceptions.
Yeah.
One exception is if it is something that is already yedua bifnei rabim, it is something that is generally known, and the person you are telling it to has some reason to need to know.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one exception. And the other exception is that you have a like you said, lifnei iver lo titen michshol, and
Right.
ahavat Israel, right? So if it is something that is important, right, that the person needs to know in order to prevent them from having some sort of hefsed or something like that,
Right. Yeah.
that is not that is not lashon hara. So
Mm-hmm.
in that situation, like that there's a bad boss and somebody is thinking about working there, um, then it is a then that's already not. Now what what I think a lot more people fall into is there's what's called avak, or the dust of lashon hara,
Mm-hmm.
which is when you praise somebody in front of somebody who doesn't like them, right? So let's say I know somebody, like somebody hates Jordan Peterson,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I'm in front of some other people who have never heard of Jordan Peterson, and I start talking about Jordan Peterson, and that other person starts like saying all the bad things about Jordan Peterson. You're creating, if you're creating unnecessary, and
Right.
again the question becomes like what's necessary, what's not necessary, like all of these, they're like, these are very complex halachot, and that's why, like, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, the book Chafetz Chaim is an important book, right? At at the same time, any halacha, right? Any halacha requires that you realize there are many competing values
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
in every situation. And the that is the process of learning halachot, is learning, okay, in each situation I have to compare all of these things, and you also have to kind of pray. Phlebas is definitely right. Wisdom is a huge part of it,
Mm-hmm.
but you also have to, in essence, at any moment, you have to pray for some guidance and learn Torah in order to have greater wisdom, in order to have better guidance, right? Oh, maybe even praising someone in front of somebody else could be lashon hara, right? Or when I am talking to someone, mostly lashon hara, it becomes a problem of you just want to talk about something and you're trying to understand it yourself, but in your discussion with other people, you're in fact telling people about things that they may not necessarily need to know, which could end up hurting the person you're talking about, right?
Or
So if
creating something that you're.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah, I feel like this might be a different discussion,
mm,
but I feel like you mentioned Paul Van der Klay's video about, and I watched it, the lonely in the bedroom, lonely bedroom,
yeah, yeah.
and it felt so relevant because this whole idea of creating these concepts for or talking about these things, just like in America where you have this concept of high school shooters, right? So even saying that, creating these concepts is putting them into the air, right? Is
Psychological contagion is
right.
another thing that's absolutely huge and requires a lot of wisdom, and unfortunately too much. So this is one of my personal bugaboos.
Mm-hmm.
So basically it's become unthinkable that when someone commits suicide, the Chevra Kadisha refuses them a Jewish burial,
Mm-hmm.
right? A suicide is not allowed a normal Jewish burial.
Right.
They're buried outside the cemetery. And basically we don't do that anymore because like we give all kinds of reasons, but basically we don't do that anymore. And while I understand that feeling of like, okay, why am I going to do this to a family that, now, first of all, they're not even allowed to set Shiva for a suicide, right? Can you imagine telling parents that their kid committed suicide and you're not allowed to sit Shiva for them,
Yeah.
right? And so a lot of rabbis don't. But that's because they don't understand suicide contagion.
Right.
Suicide is actually a contagious mental condition.
Mm-hmm.
And to contain suicide contagion by denying certainly a hesped, but denying a Jewish burial and denying all the things that go along with normal mourning to a suicide is something that we may have not known 100 years ago as well as we know now, but like there was the wisdom of halacha preventing additional suicides.
Yeah.
Right? And this has become one of my bugaboos about rabbis no longer enforcing that, because it's like I understand you mean well, but people are dying because you mean well.
Yeah, no, I think it's it's a very complex. I tend to agree. I mean, the sentiment, that's why, because I can see it in various other examples.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a very complex issue.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Let's see if we can. How far is the next one? I don't know where's a good place to stop. So let's. Okay. Well, kol sheken v'kal v'chomer. So how much more so an a fortiori? Mevatel eze mitzvah aseh she'efshar lo lekayma. And if a person has a positive mitzvah like putting on tefillin and he doesn't do it, kamo kol she'efshar lo la'asok b'torah ve'eno osek. And this is the really hard one, bitul Torah, right? If you have any free time and you could be studying Torah and you don't, and in Haredi society, this becomes a big deal. Sha'alav, I remember one of my rabbis in yeshiva, he's like, pastime. They call it pastime. What does that mean, pastime? Like God gave you time to like it is your life. He chayecha, right? It's your life. God gave you time, and you want to pass it. Like it's like it's like you want to waste your time. It's a pastime. Chas v'shalom, pastime. And he was very clear, like, okay, recreation, you're setting this time apart in order to rest, to whatever. Yes, that's fine. But
Right.
pastime, you're trying to pass the time. Chas v'shalom. Alav darshu rabbeinu zechronam levracha ki davar Hashem baza hikaret tikaret, that such a person is, the sages called him someone who is scorns God's word. Tikaret tikaret, he shall surely be cut off. Right? Uv shita de mikre rasha tfei me'over isur de rabbanan. And such a person is more of a sinner than somebody who, because this is a biblical injunction, somebody who transgresses a biblical prohibition, like it's worse than not doing something that you're supposed to do according to the Torah. And so a Beinoni isn't even somebody who has a pastime, Hashem Yiracheh. And that's why Rabbah could say that he was a Beinoni, in that he didn't have any sins, because any sin you have at that moment, you are a Rasha. Uma shekatuv bazohar chalak shlishi daf resh lamed aleph kol memuatin avonotav, he who suffers sins, whose sins are few. I don't know the rest of the Zohar, so we're going to have to read the thing. He sha'alat Rav Hamnuna le'Eliyahu. This is what Rav Hamnuna asks Elijah. So this is actually in a Haggah. It's in a note, I believe, in Tanya, where this is for people who actually know Zohar and stuff, and more learned people who are asking questions. So don't be too bothered if you don't quite understand it. Ava lefi teshuvat Eliyahu sham, we see that actually Elijah, when he gives the answer, perush tzaddik v'ra, who kamosh katuv baraya mehemna parsha mishpatim delail, that when he gives his answer, that's like we explained above what the Zohar says.
Wait, so with Rava,
Uh-huh.
why did he? So why did he mistake himself as Benoni? Why does he conclude that he did that?
Because he knew that at any moment, if you commit a sin, you're a Rasha. So he's saying, "Oh, I don't commit sins, so I'm not a Rasha."
Right.
Right. So that makes him a Beinoni.
Okay.
Yeah.
And why not a tzaddik then?
Because a tzaddik is somebody who has repented of all his sins and does, and honestly, I mean, so Rabbah that's why Abaye answers him. He's like, you're not letting anybody else live. You have to realize you're a tzaddik when it comes down to it. But it is the way of a righteous person, right? Afilu kol ha'olam omrim lecha she'ata tzaddik, tiyeh beinecha kerasha. You should see yourself as a rasha, but at least, I mean, he didn't go that far. He didn't say Russia kegonana. Then really he would let, yeah. But yeah. So I mean, ultimately, what the Alter Rebbe is explaining is that all of us should, in fact, emulate this view that Rabbah has, which is okay, at this moment, the two of us aren't doing too many sins while we're sitting here, right? And hopefully we have at least enough busha to wish we hadn't done the sins that we have done, right? So really, amech kulam tzadikim. So honestly, we're sitting here two tzadikim, kind of, right? But we realize, okay, I'm not a tzaddik. I don't know if you're a tzaddik, but I'm not a tzaddik, right? And so really, it's
Tzadikim
that's
anachnu
why
v'lo
Sefer.
chatanu.
What?
There's like in the prayer there is, which is a little bit confusing to me, but I understand the intention. But it says tzadikim anachnu v'lo chatanu, and then it goes into like
Aval
Asham
chatan.
bagadnu.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. It's understanding that, okay, we're human beings. We're these animal souls with a spark of divinity within us, which motivates us towards the good, right?
Yeah.
Ultimately, and this is really so. Let me just finish this note, then we'll stop. Veshivim panim laTorah, and there are 70 faces to the Torah, meaning, okay, once you're already asking from the Zohar, you have to understand that there are many ways of understanding things. Okay,
Yeah.
so that's us for this week on that. But so to your question, we have to keep this nuance in our lives of not falling into depression and not falling into holalut or falling into carelessness, right?
Right.
And so as human beings, ein tzadik ba'aretz v'lo chata, right? There is no such thing as a righteous person who doesn't sin. And Shiva yipol tzaddik v'kam, right? So that a righteous man falls 7 times and gets up, because we are human beings, right? We are Baal Gavul. We are finite things. And the fact that we are Baal Gavul is actually ultimately God's doing, right? So we have no capacity to be completely righteous. That's not a capacity that we have. But va'amech kulam tzadikim, your people are all righteous. Why? Because ultimately God doesn't want us to die. God, we are God's children. And the analogy I would make is, when you have kids, Bezrat Hashem, you will teach them how to ride a bike, and while they're riding the bike, you'll hold on and you'll say, "I won't let go, I won't let go, I won't let go," and then you'll let go, and then they'll be riding and they'll notice you let go, and they'll fall and skin their knees, and they're like, "Dad, Tati, why'd you let me go?" Right?
Yeah.
Even though you knew they were gonna fall, but it's like, okay, while you're still there, right? And you would never let them seriously get hurt. You have to allow your kids to try, and that's how God is with us. He allows us to try,
Right.
knowing that we're gonna skin our knees at least.
Right. And it's something about, I mean, you have to try, or you have to try to, I'm trying to connect it to something else, but you have to try to incorporate it, just like, because I'm thinking about, maybe you can help me connect it, but I'm thinking about, I think the Rambam is talking about it also in Shmona Plakim, about the ascetic, the person, and I think he talks about the Nazir, right? The Nazarene that had to
Nazarites,
go.
yeah.
Nazarite, sorry, that had to go and be an ascetic, but then they had to give, at the end of that, they had to give a sin offer.
Yeah.
Because you're not supposed to not partake in material things. You're supposed to do that, but in a holy way, or spiritualize it, like we said. So
Yeah. So one of the ways in Hasidic philosophy this is referred to is kivush haaretz, conquering the
Right.
land.
Hmm.
Right. So um, there there is a challenge that God has given us within our lives, and that's honestly what he talks about. The godly soul is here to train our animal soul, to help
Hmm.
us sanctify ourselves. The Eastern Orthodox will call it theosis, to become more godly, to become better than we were, right?
Yeah.
And God knows where we started, God knows how hard we tried, and God knows where we end up. And ultimately, he's the only one who can really judge, right? If we tried as hard as we could and should. And so this idea like Christians have of like, are you saved, right? Salvation, are you saved or not, right? We don't have that concept in Judaism, because like there are a few people, right? And in Sanhedrin, right, chapter 10 in Perek Chelek, it talks about like, okay, these are the people, like everybody has a Chelek Ba'olam Haba, everybody has a portion in the world to come, and it gives like 5 or 6 people in the entirety of Tanakh who don't have a Chelek in Olam Haba. And if you look at the entirety of Tanakh, like you see, like there are some really bad people that they didn't bother to list,
Right.
right? So, like, we don't, none of us compare. I mean, maybe somebody like Jeffrey Dahmer compares to like something like that, but like none of us are that sinful, right? That we won't have a chelik in Olam Haba. That's not, and that's why we continually say Kol Yisrael yesh lahem chelik l'olam haba, right? Because that's not the worry. The worry is that God has given us a capacity to be better and a challenge of being sinful.
Hmm.
And our job is to do the work, right?
Yeah.
And like the Mishnah in Avot says, Lo alecha hamalacha ligmor, ve'ein ata rashai lehibatel mimena.
Right.
You don't have to finish the job, but that doesn't mean you don't you can just write it off. You have to partake in the struggle to be a better person than God created you. And honestly, that's why circumcision is the emblem of what you call it. That's why it is the emblem of Judaism, right? Um, God creates us almost perfect, and we have to take it that extra step.
Hmm. That's a good note, I
It
think.
is, yeah. I have extra time if there's anything you wanna, or because usually we stop here because there's book club afterwards.
Yeah. Um, I should probably go actually
Okay.
tonight, more closer to
Okay.
8. Um,
Okay.
but yeah, I'd be curious to continue doing that and also continuing and see. I mean, there's more. If there's also people that are curious about this as well.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I mean, people can leave comments and stuff. I don't know how many people are actually watching. At one point, there were 9 people watching, so it's like, whoa,
yeah.
yeah, this is heavy stuff, and you know more Hebrew than the vast majority of people.
And I hope it's helping. I, I hope it'll help.
At least, hopefully, it's helping the two of us.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna end the broadcast.